The old dream of the digital economy used to have a very specific address. It lived in Silicon Valley. In the popular imagination, the future was invented inside glass office towers, venture capital boardrooms, and elite university campuses. The world's most transformative technologies seem to emerge from a narrow corridor stretching from San Francisco to Palo Alto. If you wanted to find the next great entrepreneur, the assumption was simple. Look for the founder with the prestigious degree, the elite network, the startup accelerator, the venture capital backing. Innovation, we were told, flowed from the top down, from the richest institutions to everyone else. But while the world was focused on Silicon Valley, something extraordinary was happening thousands of miles away. A transformation so large that it would eventually connect hundreds of millions of people to the digital economy in less than a decade. Not in luxury office buildings, not in elite research labs, but in villages, small towns, crowded apartments, roadside shops, and homes that had never previously been connected to the modern internet economy. Because one of the most important technology revolutions of the 21st century did not begin with artificial intelligence, it began with a smartphone. To understand why this matters, we need to go back just a little over a decade. In the early 2010s, internet access in India was growing, but for many people it remained expensive, limited, and inconsistent. Large parts of the population were still disconnected from the opportunities that people in developed economies increasingly took for granted: online education, digital banking, remote work, e-commerce, global communication. For millions of families, these things existed in theory more than reality. The digital economy was visible, but it was still far away. Then the economics changed. Cheap Android smartphones began flooding the market. Handsets that would have been considered impossible for lower-income households only a few years earlier suddenly became accessible. At the same time, mobile internet became dramatically more affordable. The turning point came in 2016 when Reliance Jio entered the telecom market and triggered a fierce price war across the industry. Data costs collapsed, internet access expanded rapidly, and almost overnight, the barriers that had separated millions of people from the online world began to disappear. For many countries, internet adoption happened gradually. For India, it often felt explosive. Entire communities seemed to arrive online at once. Parents who had never used the internet found themselves making digital payments. Small business owners started advertising products through messaging apps. Students gained access to educational resources that previously existed only in expensive urban centers. A country that had long struggled with infrastructure gaps suddenly found itself leapfrogging into the digital age. And perhaps the most important part of this story is that the smartphone was never just a communication device. For millions of people, it became infrastructure. The smartphone became a classroom, a storefront, a marketing department, a payment terminal, a job board, a bank account, and sometimes an entire business. Imagine a young woman living in a small town far from India's major commercial centers. A generation earlier, her economic opportunities would likely have been constrained by geography. Her customers would be local, her network would be local, her market would be local, but with a smartphone and an internet connection, geography suddenly became less important. She could market handmade products on social media, communicate with customers directly, accept digital payments, build an audience, and operate a business that extended far beyond the boundaries of her hometown. That story repeated itself millions of times across the country, not always dramatically, not always successfully, but consistently, quietly, relentlessly, one entrepreneur at a time, one family at a time, one smartphone at a time. This is where many outside observers misunderstand the Indian digital story. They often focus on giant technology companies, billion-dollar startups, or high-profile executives. But the real revolution was happening much lower down, among ordinary people, because the true power of a digital economy is not measured only by the size of its largest companies. It is measured by how many people gain access to opportunity. And suddenly, opportunity was becoming far more accessible. A shopkeeper could accept QR code payments. A student could learn graphic design from online tutorials. A teacher could reach thousands of viewers through educational videos. A farmer could access market information directly through mobile applications. A creator could build an audience without ever leaving their hometown. None of these examples sound revolutionary on their own, but when hundreds of millions of people begin doing them simultaneously, the effects become enormous. The result was the emergence of something economists sometimes struggle to fully capture. A digital middle class, people who were no longer passive participants in the economy, people who were actively creating value through digital tools, people who did not need permission from traditional gatekeepers to participate, and perhaps most importantly, people who began viewing technology not as entertainment, but as leverage. That distinction matters. In many wealthy countries, technology often functions primarily as convenience. Food arrives faster, messages arrive faster, services become easier. Life becomes slightly more comfortable. But in emerging economies, technology frequently serves a different purpose. It becomes a mechanism for upward mobility, a tool for escaping limitations, a way to access opportunities that were previously unavailable, a chance to rewrite the trajectory of a family's future. That creates a very different relationship with technology. When a smartphone helps you order dinner, it is useful. When a smartphone helps pay school fees, support parents, or build a business, it becomes something much more powerful. It becomes economic infrastructure, and that mindset began producing a generation of entrepreneurs unlike those typically celebrated in Western startup culture. These were not founders raising hundreds of millions of dollars. They were not appearing on magazine covers. They were not pitching investors from luxury conference rooms. Most were simply trying to solve practical problems. Can this generate income? Can this create stability? Can this improve our future? Can this survive? The questions were smaller, but in many ways they were more important, because sustainable businesses are often built by people who cannot afford failure. Across rural India and smaller cities, countless micro-entrepreneurs began building digital businesses from conditions that many Silicon Valley founders would consider impossible. Limited capital, limited infrastructure, limited safety nets, yet these constraints produce something unexpected: efficiency. Because when resources are scarce, waste becomes expensive. Every decision matters. Every opportunity matters. Every rupee matters. And over time, those pressures began shaping not just businesses, but entire ways of thinking. A culture of optimization emerged, not because it was fashionable, because it was necessary. Without realizing it, millions of people were developing skills that would become increasingly valuable in the global economy. Adaptability, resourcefulness, persistence, the ability to build under constraint, traits that would eventually attract attention far beyond India's borders. Because while this digital revolution was transforming villages, small towns, and households across India, another transformation was beginning inside the world's largest technology companies. A realization that would challenge some of the oldest assumptions about talent, innovation, and where the future actually comes from. And that is where our story goes next. For decades, Silicon Valley operated under a simple assumption: if growth was good, then more growth must be better. More employees, more projects, more products, more expansion, more capital. The formula seemed almost unstoppable. Money was cheap. Investors were optimistic. Technology companies could afford to prioritize speed over efficiency because the market rewarded scale above all else. The objective was not necessarily to become profitable today. The objective was to dominate tomorrow. And for a long time, that strategy worked. Companies grew from garages into trillion-dollar corporations. Venture capital transformed obscure startups into global platforms. Entire industries were disrupted by businesses that prioritized expansion over discipline. But every economic era eventually encounters its limits. And when the global financial environment began changing, the technology industry was forced to confront a reality it had not faced in years. Growth alone was no longer enough. Suddenly, investors wanted answers. How efficient is the business? How sustainable is the business? Can it survive without endless capital? Can it generate real value? The questions were changing, and so were the people being rewarded. The modern technology economy is increasingly dependent on infrastructure, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, data centers, semiconductor design, complex software systems that require years of disciplined execution rather than short bursts of hype. These are not industries that succeed because of charisma. They succeed because thousands of small decisions are executed correctly over long periods of time. Which means the most valuable people are often not the loudest. They are the most reliable, the most adaptable, the most efficient, and this is where a surprising connection begins to emerge. Because many of the traits suddenly becoming valuable inside global technology companies are remarkably similar to the traits developed by millions of people navigating resource-constrained environments. The ability to solve problems without perfect tools, the ability to operate under uncertainty, the ability to stretch limited resources further than expected. In India, there is a concept often described by a single word: jugaad. The word is difficult to translate perfectly because it represents more than a technique. It is a mindset, a way of approaching problems when ideal conditions do not exist, a way of moving forward when systems are incomplete, a way of finding solutions inside constraints. To someone raised in an environment with abundant resources, this way of thinking can appear unconventional. To someone raised in an environment where resources are limited, it often feels completely natural. And as strange as it sounds, modern technology increasingly rewards this mentality. Not because companies want improvisation, but because they want efficiency. The era of unlimited budgets is fading. Every dollar invested in infrastructure must produce results. Every engineer must create measurable value. Every project must justify its existence. In that environment, optimization becomes a competitive advantage. And optimization is something millions of Indian students encounter long before they ever enter the workforce. The competition begins early. In many middle-class households, education is not viewed simply as personal development. It is viewed as economic mobility, a pathway toward stability, a pathway toward opportunity, a pathway toward changing the trajectory of an entire family. That reality creates extraordinary pressure. Students compete for limited seats in highly respected institutions. Families invest years preparing children for entrance examinations. Performance becomes deeply connected to future outcomes. The experience is often intense, sometimes exhausting, sometimes controversial, but it also creates an environment where discipline becomes normal, where persistence becomes expected, where setbacks are treated as obstacles rather than endpoints. Again, this does not mean one educational system is universally better than another. That would be far too simplistic. The world's leading universities continue to produce groundbreaking research, influential thinkers, and extraordinary innovators. But what matters here is not which system is superior. What matters is which traits the economy currently rewards, and the answer changes over time. During one era, social networks may provide the greatest advantage. During another, creativity may dominate. During another, capital may determine success. Today, a growing number of industries are rewarding adaptability, particularly as artificial intelligence begins reshaping knowledge work. For decades, access to information itself provided an advantage. Elite institutions acted as gateways. They controlled networks, they controlled credentials, they controlled access to opportunities. But information has become increasingly democratized. A student with an internet connection can access lectures, tutorials, technical documentation, coding communities, and educational resources that previous generations could only obtain through formal institutions. The barriers have not disappeared, but they have weakened, and when barriers weaken, competition expands. Now, a talented developer in a small Indian city can contribute to the same open-source project as an engineer working in New York, London, or San Francisco. A freelance designer can serve international clients from a laptop. A creator can build an audience without ever relocating. A startup can reach global customers without opening offices around the world. Geography still matters, but less than it used to. And every time geography becomes less important, talent becomes more widely distributed. That shift is quietly changing how companies think about recruitment. For years, elite credentials acted as a shortcut. Employers assumed that prestigious institutions filtered for intelligence, discipline, and capability. In many cases, they still do. But increasingly, companies have access to additional signals: open-source contributions, technical portfolios, public projects, digital reputations, real-world outputs. The focus is slowly shifting from where someone learned to what they can actually build, from credentials to capability, from status to results. And nowhere is this transition more visible than in the leadership structures of major technology firms. Over the last 2 decades, some of the world's most influential technology companies have increasingly been led by executives whose careers were built not on celebrity entrepreneurship, but on operational excellence. The modern technology giant is no longer a rebellious startup fighting for survival. It is a vast digital infrastructure provider, a system serving billions of users, a platform managing immense quantities of data, an organization that must function reliably every single day. That kind of responsibility rewards a different style of leadership: less showmanship, more systems thinking, less disruption for its own sake, more long-term execution. The technology industry is gradually learning a lesson that many entrepreneurs in rural India discovered years ago. Growth without discipline is fragile. Scale without efficiency is fragile. Innovation without sustainability is fragile. Eventually, every system must confront reality, and reality has a way of rewarding people who know how to operate within limits. Which raises a fascinating question. If the future belongs to people capable of building under constraint, if digital tools continue spreading opportunity beyond traditional centers of power, if geography matters less than it once did, then what happens when billions of people gain access to the same technological capabilities? What happens when the next generation of entrepreneurs is no longer concentrated inside a handful of wealthy cities? What happens when intelligence, ambition, and connectivity begin emerging from everywhere at once? Because that future is already arriving. And it is creating one of the largest redistributions of economic opportunity in modern history, a transformation that extends far beyond India. A transformation that could redefine where innovation comes from, who participates in it, and what the global economy looks like in the decades ahead. And that transformation is only beginning. For most of modern history, geography determined destiny. Where you were born shaped the schools you could attend, the people you could meet, the opportunities you could access, the careers you could build. Talent existed everywhere. Opportunity did not. And because opportunity was concentrated, power became concentrated too. The world's most influential universities, corporations, financial institutions, and research centers existed within a relatively small number of countries. Innovation flowed outward from those centers to the rest of the world. That system created extraordinary technological progress, but it also created an assumption. The assumption that the future would always be invented by the same places, the same institutions, the same networks, the same people. Then the internet arrived. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the foundations underneath that assumption began to shift. Because unlike previous technological revolutions, the internet does not simply distribute products, it distributes capability. A textbook can be digitized, a lecture can be streamed, a coding tutorial can be watched from anywhere, a software project can be built collaboratively across continents. Knowledge that once required physical proximity to elite institutions can now travel instantly. The result is not the disappearance of traditional advantages. Those advantages still exist. Elite universities still matter, powerful networks still matter, capital still matters, but their monopoly is weakening. And history suggests that whenever monopolies weaken, competition expands. That is exactly what is happening today. Across India, millions of people who would have been excluded from previous waves of economic development are now participating directly in global markets. A graphic designer in Jaipur can work with clients in Europe. A software developer in Coimbatore can contribute to international projects. A content creator in a rural district can reach audiences larger than many traditional media companies. The barriers have not vanished, but they are lower than they have ever been. And when barriers fall, unexpected competitors emerge. This is one reason the rise of artificial intelligence is so significant. Many people view AI primarily as a threat to jobs, a threat to industries, a threat to economic security, and those concerns are understandable. But AI is also something else. It is an amplifier. Like previous technological revolutions, it magnifies existing capabilities. The person who knows how to use it effectively becomes dramatically more productive. A solo entrepreneur can perform tasks that once required an entire team. A small business can automate operations that previously demanded significant capital. A developer can accelerate workflows. A creator can produce content faster. A student can access personalized learning tools. The technology itself does not create ambition, but it amplifies ambition wherever ambition already exists. And this is where the story becomes particularly interesting, because ambition is not evenly distributed according to income. It is not evenly distributed according to geography. It is not evenly distributed according to prestige. Some of the most ambitious people in the world live far from the traditional centers of power. Some of the most determined entrepreneurs operate with almost no margin for error. Some of the most resourceful builders emerge from environments where failure carries real consequences, which means that when powerful tools become widely available, the competitive landscape changes. The future becomes less dependent on where someone starts, and more dependent on what they can do. This shift is already visible in the labor market. Companies increasingly recruit globally. Remote teams operate across multiple continents. Open source communities allow developers from different countries to collaborate on the same projects. Technical skills are demonstrated publicly rather than hidden behind credentials. The old gatekeepers still exist, but they no longer control every gate. And perhaps that is the deeper significance of India's digital transformation. The story is not merely about smartphones, it is not merely about entrepreneurship, and it is certainly not just about one country. It is about what happens when technology lowers the cost of participation for hundreds of millions of people, because participation changes everything. A person who can participate economically behaves differently than a person who cannot. A community that can access opportunity behaves differently than one that is isolated from it. A society connected to global markets begins developing different expectations about its future. This is why the smartphone revolution matters. The device itself is not the story. The story is what the device unlocked. For decades, economic progress often required massive physical infrastructure, factories, industrial parks, transportation networks, large-scale investment projects. Those things remain important, but digital infrastructure introduced a new possibility: economic participation through connectivity. A smartphone connected to affordable internet can unlock opportunities that previously required proximity to major cities. Not every opportunity, not every career, but enough to alter the trajectory of millions of lives. And when millions of trajectories change simultaneously, entire economies begin to change with them. The effects are already visible. India has become one of the world's largest digital markets. Digital payments have expanded dramatically. Online entrepreneurship has surged. Technology adoption continues spreading into smaller cities and rural regions. And global corporations increasingly view the country not simply as a market, but as a source of talent, innovation, and experimentation. Because something remarkable happens when large populations gain access to digital tools. The probability of innovation increases, not because everyone becomes an entrepreneur, not because everyone becomes an engineer, but because the number of people capable of contributing expands dramatically. A larger pool of participants creates a larger pool of ideas. More experiments, more businesses, more solutions, more unexpected breakthroughs. This is the hidden mechanism behind many technological revolutions. Innovation is often treated as a function of genius. In reality, it is frequently a function of participation. The more people who can engage with a system, the greater the chance that valuable ideas emerge from unexpected places. And increasingly, those unexpected places are no longer so unexpected. The next generation of builders may emerge from a village with reliable mobile internet rather than a prestigious campus. The next successful software company may begin with a laptop instead of a venture capital meeting. The next influential creator may come from a small town rather than a media capital. Not because geography no longer matters, but because geography matters less, and that distinction is transforming the global economy. For Silicon Valley, this creates both an opportunity and a challenge. The opportunity is obvious: access to a vastly larger pool of talent, access to new markets, access to new perspectives. The challenge is psychological. For generations, prestige served as a convenient proxy for capability. The assumption was simple: the best opportunities go to the best institutions. The best institutions produce the best talent. The system was not perfect, but it was familiar. Now the world is becoming more complicated. Talent is increasingly visible everywhere. Capability is increasingly measurable everywhere. Competition is increasingly coming from everywhere. And that means institutions can no longer rely solely on reputation. Individuals can no longer rely solely on credentials. Everyone is being evaluated more directly by what they can actually produce. Which brings us back to a simple smartphone. A device that many people still think of primarily as a communication tool. Yet for millions of entrepreneurs across India, it became something far more important: a gateway. A gateway into markets, into education, into financial systems, into global networks, into opportunities that previous generations could barely imagine. And perhaps that is the real lesson hidden inside this story. The future is not being built exclusively inside elite campuses, nor is it being built exclusively inside corporate headquarters. It is being built wherever people gain access to the tools that allow them to participate. Sometimes that happens in Silicon Valley, sometimes it happens in Bangalore, sometimes it happens in a small rural town connected to the internet for the first time. Because the most important resource in the digital age is not capital, it is not geography, it is not even technology itself. It is access. Access to knowledge, access to opportunity, access to the ability to create. And when access expands, history tends to become less predictable. Somewhere tonight, a student is learning a skill from a smartphone screen. A small business owner is processing digital payments from customers they have never met. A young entrepreneur is building something from a place that traditional maps of innovation rarely acknowledge. Most of them will never appear on magazine covers. Most of them will never become billionaires, but together, they represent something far more significant: a redistribution of possibility. A world where the ability to participate is spreading faster than ever before. And if that trend continues, the next great chapter of the digital revolution may not be defined by where innovation has always come from, but by how many new people are finally able to contribute to it.